This project is a heavily loaded with modeling project, and I'm going to show you some initial results, not all, unfortunately, in this short time. Now, this is a joint work between IIT Kanpur and Paul Whitehead at Oxford, and one of my students, and Emily, has been involved in this project as well. Now, before we start, one thing which is very important to understand, that a delta system is controlled by two controls. One is a downstream control, which we have been talking about for quite some time, the sea level change and many other issues. And a very strong control comes from the upstream control. And a delta like the Ganga-Brahmaputra delta is fed by two very powerful systems, Ganga and the Brahmaputra, and of course a small system called Meghna. So this control which is fed into the delta system from the upstream is a very, very important control to look at, and therefore how the flows and how the fluxes of the certain elements like nitrogen and phosphorus, for example, will feed into the delta is one of the important aspects which we have been looking at. So we have two key questions to answer. One, that how will this future socio-economic changes and climatic changes will affect the fluxes in terms of flows as well as the nutrients. I will deal with the nitrogen flux for today, and how can the management and policy options can be designed to reduce these impacts. So, needless to say that this has a huge implication in terms of the delta management, the aquaculture, the agriculture, and of course the flow which will ultimately reach into the basin. So, it is a huge societal importance. It has all the upstream alteration which is being planned in the Ganga system as well as in the Brahmaputra system are ultimately going to affect the flows downstream in a very major way. And don't forget that a large part of the Gangetic plains is very heavily agriculture as well. So a lot of flux which comes from there is ultimately reaching the delta and the estuarine system. So that is the impact which we've been looking at, and the output of this model has actually gone into the other models which other colleagues are running to understand the dynamics of the delta system as well. So just to clarify a point, that modeling a system like Ganga is not easy. It's just the sheer dimension of the system we are talking about, 980,000 square kilometer, 2,510 kilometer of length, and a huge suspended load, and of course the agricultural plains. That makes it very, very hard to model this kind of a basin. And then of course from the top of that, the unavailability of the so-called confidential data, particularly the flow data, makes it even harder. So what we have done is an exercise which is, I would at best say, the first cut exercise, but still very important because we have been able to capture a lot of trends in terms of the flows as well as the nitrogen fluxes, for example. Okay, so what Emily talked about a while ago is that, and of course Attila talked about yesterday, was we had a set of scenarios available from the different workers in the group, both in terms of the climatic scenario as well as the socio-economic pathways, and the factors which contributed to decision to decide these scenarios are basically population changes, sewage treatment works, which is existing and also being planned as a part of the Ganga River Basin Management Plan, which is being there, and of course the water demands, the atmospheric hydrogen deposition, the land use changes, whatever secondary data we could get out of the literature in terms of the projected changes, and of course I'll show you one scenario at least in terms of the major water transfer plans which India has at the moment. So we have run our model for most of these scenarios. I'll show some of these today, and particularly in terms of the nitrogen fluxes, and only for the Ganga for today. But we have done similar analysis for Brahmaputra, for Meghna, and also for phosphorus. And then of course the work is still going on. So these are some of the population trends for the different, three different scenarios. We have, takes a while to change. Okay. So we have used a model called INCA model. This is Integrated Catchment Model, and this is an in-house model developed at Oxford by Paul Whitehead and his group, and therefore we had a strong control on the model parameters and so on. This is a distributed model which combines with a couple of other hydrological models, for example, PERSIS, to give us the flow outputs, or flow inputs for this model. And then, of course, we use the other proxies for nitrogen fluxes and the phosphorus fluxes and so on. This has been applied to many other basins, but then this is the first time we have applied this model on such a large system like the Ganga, for example. Now, this is something which I'm sure most of you know, that this is how the nitrogen moves in the system. This is more or less like the nitrogen cycle, and I just want to draw your attention to the two important ways the nitrogen moves, one as nitrate, and then of course the other as ammonium. Both of them eventually find their way into the river, and our proxy included both the nitrate modeling as well as the ammonia modeling together, for example. Okay, how did we go about it? We divided this entire basin into different reaches, and the decision about division of these reaches were based on the major tributary confluences, the major sampling and monitoring points, which were available for pollution load mapping and so on. And then, of course, the effluent input abstraction, which are typically the major cities and so on. This was the final reach structure we came up with. We had a total of 70 reaches to be modeled. Out of that, 21 was for the Ganga, 10 for the Jamuna, and then other tributaries included was about 39 reaches. So that was the extent of the model we actually ran for this basin. Then, so this is the final output in terms of the different sub-basins. You can see these are all 71 reaches of the Ganga, which we actually modeled. So we had results. So we basically had results for each of these sub-basins, and any point along the main stem we could actually derive the results for. But we will show you results primarily for the end point, which is basically important for the delta point. But then we have results, and we can share that with the group and anybody else who wants to, for any of the points along the Ganga, for example. Okay. So these are some of the data sets which we use. This is the detailed land use, land cover data, which was provided from the NRSC Hyderabad. We had a total of 26 classes to start with, very detailed NRSC land use, land cover map. We converted that, we merged many of the classes. Basically, 6 major classes were made out of that for simplification of this land use, land cover map for the INCA model. Next, we also got the climate data from the UK Met Office, and this was downscaled data, the RCM level, 25 kilometer grid. And this is what we have been showing you all along. These are the 3 climatic scenarios which came out after a lot of discussion. These are the individual values which we use for the 3 different scenarios, Q0, Q8, and Q16. So these are our climatic scenarios. We have already shown you the SSP scenarios which before. Now, so this was using the using a hydrological model and using the inputs from the climate model. This was our input for the INCA model. This is basically daily rainfall data, the hydrologically effective rainfall data, the temperature data, and then of course the soil moisture deficit data. This came out. So INCA requires the data set in a daily scale. Then these are, and then of course, as I said, we had limited data to calibrate the flows, but we did the calibration at about 4 or 5 stations along the main stem of the Ganga in the Indian part, and this is the data for the Harding Bridge in Bangladesh. We had a relatively very good match of the observed data and the simulated data. We had some limited access to the abstractions because that's not very easily available, but whatever abstraction we had available, we added that, and then we got this, this model, flow data for 4 major stations. This is very much upstream. This is, and these 2 are the middle stream data in the main stem of the Ganga, for example. Now, then we also similarly calibrated the nitrogen flux with whatever data we had available. 1 point is at Kanpur, and then 1 point was in Bangladesh, very further down as well. So we had a reasonably good calibration for the nitrogen flux as well. Okay, now, so having done this, this very extensive exercise of the data input and calibration, we started looking at the different scenarios. Remember, we had 3 climatic scenarios and 3 SSPs, and then we ran the model for 3 different years, for the 1990s, for 2050, and then 2090. So you can imagine that there were 3 by 3 matrix, and then you add another 3 scenarios for that as well. So a lot of results, but so this is a result for the climate scenario Q0, and these are the flow simulations. This is a nitrate simulation, and this is the ammonium solution. The blue color here represents for the simulation for the 1990s, red is for 2050s, and then this is for the 2090s, for example, right? Now you can see the major conclusion from this is that there is a shift here. There's a flow is increasing through time, but the pattern or pattern is not changing in a very major way, which means that there's no major shift in the seasonality of the whole flow. Okay, so that's one of the things. You can see that the nitrate concentration is decreasing through time, and that's basically the effect of the dilution. As you go up in terms of flow volumes, the nitrate basically goes down, and same trend is for the ammonia as well. So that's basically an effect of the nitrogen flow, but then we don't see a very major change here in terms of the concentrations of both nitrate and ammonia as far as the climatic scenario Q0 is concerned. Look at the other scenarios. Similarly, we looked at the effect of the SSPs on the Ganga flow and the water quality as well. And this is a flow, and the dotted line here basically shows the baseline data for 1990. And again, we don't see a very major change in the flows because we haven't considered the changes in the irrigation flows, and water transfers has not been considered yet. I'll show you separate scenarios for that. And again, a very similar trend in terms of nitrate and the same trend in the ammonia. But look at this red curve here. There's a very large reduction in the nitrogen and the nitrate both under the MS scenario. This is the moderate sustainability scenario, and that is basically a reflection of the fact that we have considered that the effluent treatment will increase significantly in the next coming years because these are the plans which the government is actually going ahead with, and that should have very important implications in terms of the river ecology and the reduced nitrogen load into the Bangladesh. And I must also inform you that we had a similar result for the phosphorus as well. We ran the same model for the phosphorus as well. Similarly, if you look at the scenarios combined, the climatic scenario and the SSP scenarios together, this is a very heavily loaded slide, but all this shows primarily is that these are our different scenarios, Q0, Q16, and Q8, and then of course these are our mean flows and maximum flows and the minimum flows which are being changing here, and that's the impact of the three SSPs here for the three climatic scenarios. Now the major points I have just summarized here. One point which came up very strongly that the monsoon season is being shortened in the Q16 scenario, and but then the mean flows are increasing. That basically means that the events of the high floods and the droughts are going to increase very significantly. But the most important effect we should see here, and that is the impact on the minimum flows, and that is what is very crucial to understand, because the minimum flows are the ones which are going to be very severely affected because of these climatic scenarios. Similarly, and then similarly for the SSPs, you don't see a very major change in the GBM mean flows as well. Then, as I said, we also ran the model for one of the very major mega projects which India is planning. The serious discussions are going on right now in terms of major water transfer from the northern part of the system to the southern part, and we assumed that there will be about 20% reduction or diversion from the Ganga and 30% from Brahmaputra. Again, this is just an assumption, and we modeled that. And again, the major conclusion out of this scenario is that the impact of the water transfer and flows is very, very significant. We observed something like 22% reduction in the peak flows for the 2090s and about 48% reduction in the low flows, and that's a massive reduction. And again, this basically very validates the former point that the low flows are the ones which are going to be very severely affected because of the climatic change here, and of course, if you add up the water transfers as well. So that's basically going to have a very, very large scale impact on the delta ecosystem. So just to conclude from here, we have tried the INCA model for the first time on such a large river system, and we have been able to capture the spatial and temporal complexity of the system, flows as well as the nitrogen flux. We do see significant impact on the flows, particularly the peak flows, and that's why the floods and droughts are going to be changing as well. The impact of water transfer, the major water transfer, if at all that happens, is going to be very, very severe, very, very important to understand. We have assumed, we are showing that the cleanup operations which are on the way for the Ganga River will reduce the nitrogen fluxes in a very serious, very, very, very major way. But then we have a lot of further steps to follow, and one of them is to look at the impact of the existing dams and the proposed dams as well on the flows. different agricultural strategies, Emily was trying to point out as well, and then of course the other kinds of, as and when we progress, we'll know more about the different kinds of strategies which we have in mind. So we will try to run these kind of scenarios as well on this model and see how this works. So thank you for your attention.